At its height, the Roman Empire controlled roughly 70 million people. 70 million people living in Britain, North Africa, Egypt, Syria, Gaul, Greece, Judea, Spain, places separated by thousands of kilometers. People speaking different languages, worshipping different gods, living completely different lives. And somehow, Rome, one city, built beside a river in central Italy, controlled all of them. For centuries. Now here is the question historians have debated for nearly 2000 years. How? Most people think they already know the answer. The Roman army, the famous legions, the discipline, the weapons, the battlefield tactics, and yes, the Roman army was real. The Roman army was extraordinary. But here is the part almost nobody talks about. At its peak, Rome only had around 300 to 400,000 soldiers to control 70 million people. That means one soldier for every 175 to 230 civilians. Those numbers do not work. Not if force is your only tool. Not if the army is the entire answer. So what was Rome actually doing? The real answer, buried inside the Roman law, ancient records, letters from governors, and imperial policies, is far more sophisticated than an army. Rome built a system so intelligent, so psychologically deep, and so carefully designed, that most people living inside it did not even experience it as control. They experienced it as civilization. Today, we are going inside that system, layer by layer, and by the end of this video, you will never look at Rome, or power, or empire the same way again. Before we understand how Rome truly controlled its empire, we first need to destroy one of the biggest myths in history. The myth is this: Rome controlled the world through military force alone, that the legions were everywhere, that the army was the empire. It sounds logical, and it is completely wrong. Let us do the math, because the math destroys the myth. At the height of Roman power, the empire covered roughly 5 million square kilometers. 5 million. That is nearly half the size of the continental United States. And yet, the Roman army only numbered around 350,000 to 450,000 men, spread across all of it. And here is the detail most people miss. Those soldiers were not spread evenly. Most Roman troops stood near the borders. The Rhine, the Danube, Britain, Syria, North Africa. The Roman military functioned more like a border defense system than an internal police force. Inside the empire itself, there were surprisingly few soldiers. In many major Roman cities, you might only find a few hundred Roman troops, sometimes even less. So the question becomes unavoidable. How do you control 70 million people with such a tiny military footprint? The answer was a network of systems. 5 major systems, each one connected to the others. And together, they created one of the most effective control structures in human history. System number 1 was the client kingdom system. And it was brilliant, because Rome understood something most empires never did. Why spend money controlling people yourself, when you can convince local rulers to do it for you? When Rome encountered a kingdom, a tribe, or a regional power, the first Roman response usually was not conquest. It was an offer. Ideal. Rome would say, your king remains king. Your culture stays intact. Your religion continues. Your laws survive. In exchange, you support Rome. You maintain order. You pay tribute. You provide soldiers when requested. And most importantly, you never threaten Roman interests. Pause. The rulers who accepted this deal became known as allies and friends of the Roman people. It sounded honorable, but in reality, it was a leash. A leash made from gold instead of iron. And that made it far more powerful. Because the client kings actually benefited from the system. Rome protected them. Rome opened trade routes. Rome gave them legitimacy. Being connected to Rome increased their prestige. Local rulers competed for Roman approval. And the perfect example of this was Herod the Great. Herod was not Roman. He came from the region near modern Jordan. He spoke Aramaic. He ruled Judea. But politically, Herod belonged to Rome. He rebuilt Jerusalem. constructed massive Roman-style cities, protected trade routes, maintained stability, and because of that, Rome barely needed soldiers in the region during his reign. Herod did the work for them. This pattern repeated everywhere. North Africa, Britain, the Eastern kingdoms, Germanic tribes. Rome turned local power structures into Roman machinery, and it worked for centuries. But eventually, problems appeared. When client kings died, Rome often had to decide who replaced them. And sometimes, those transitions created chaos. That is exactly what happened after Herod died. His kingdom fractured, violence increased, and eventually Rome absorbed the territory directly. But Rome did not abandon the system. Instead, they tightened control. The list simply became shorter. This next system might be the most intelligent thing Rome ever created. Citizenship. Now today, citizenship sounds boring. A passport, a legal status. But in ancient Rome, citizenship was power. Roman citizenship meant protection, legal rights, property ownership, business security, access to Roman courts, and perhaps most importantly, status. Being Roman mattered, and Rome distributed citizenship carefully, strategically, almost like a reward system. The military became the main pass. Rome recruited non-Romans into auxiliary forces. Syrian archers, German cavalry, North African horsemen, men from conquered territories joined the Roman military, and after 25 years of service, they received full Roman citizenship, not just for themselves, for their children too. Think about how brilliant this was. Rome took the strongest young men from conquered societies, trained them, disciplined them, transformed them psychologically, and then turned them into Romans. The people who called leveled rebellions became the people defending the empire. But Rome did not stop there. The elite classes received their own pass into Roman society. Local aristocrats were invited into Roman administration. Their sons studied in Rome. Some entered the Roman Senate itself. Eventually, Roman emperors came from Spain, North Africa, the eastern provinces, the descendants of conquered peoples, became rulers of the empire. That is not just conquest. That is integration. And integration is far more powerful. Because your future depends on Rome. You stop resisting Rome. Then came one of the most important moments in Roman history. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to almost every free person in the empire. Suddenly, millions of people became Romans overnight. A farmer in Egypt, a merchant in Syria, a craftsman in Britain, all Roman. And now, Rome's survival became their survival. Because if Rome collapsed, so did the legal system, the economy, the rights, the identity, the stability. Rome transformed identity itself into infrastructure. Rome did not just build an empire. Rome built an economy. And eventually, that economy became impossible to escape. Pause. By the height of Roman power, the empire had created the largest free trade zone in the ancient world. Goods moved across continents. Egyptian grain fed Rome. Spanish olive oil reached Britain. Syrian glass appeared in German markets. Roman wine traveled everywhere. And Roman merchants operated under Roman law. Protected, secure, connected. Piracy in the Mediterranean was crushed. The sea itself became, or sea, Mare Nostrum, a Roman commercial highway. But hidden inside this prosperity was control. Because a region depended on Roman trade. It depended on Rome. A merchant whose wealth came from Roman markets could not afford rebellion. A city connected to Roman routes and Roman commerce needed Roman stability. Rome had a prosperity dependent on participation, and participation created loyalty. Slow emphasis. The more successful you became, the more invested you became in Rome's surviving. Rome also standardized currency, watts, measurements, contracts, infrastructure. Everything became connected. And once people entered that system, leaving it became painful. Economically painful. Even taxation reinforced the system. Taxes had to be paid in Roman coins, which meant provincial populations needed Roman currency. which meant they had to participate in the Roman economy. Rome designed a structure where everyday survival slowly tied people deeper into imperial life. Not through fear, but through dependency. And dependency is often stronger than force. This next system worked more slowly, but its effects lasted the longest. Cultural assimilation, or what historians call Romanization. Pause. Rome did not use conquer people. Rome convinced people to want to become a Roman. The Roman historian Tacitus described this process perfectly. He explained how Roman governors encouraged conquered peoples to build Roman-style cities, baths, forums, temples, public squares. They educated local elites in Latin, encouraged Roman clothing, Roman customs, Roman architecture, and eventually, people began adapting Roman culture willingly. Tacitus then wrote one of the most chilling observations in history. He said, "The cayet civilization, when it was. System 2 is the one that I believe is the most underrated and the most sophisticated of all Rome's control mechanisms. Citizenship. This sounds almost boring when you say it that way. Citizenship. A legal status. A document. But Roman citizenship was not a document. It was a weapon. And Rome said it with the precision of a surgeon. What citizenship actually meant. In the modern world, citizenship mostly means you have a passport and can vote. In Rome, citizenship was an entirely different thing. Roman citizenship meant you could own property in Rome and have it protected by Roman law. It meant you could make contracts that were enforceable across the entire empire. It meant your children were citizens. It meant you could not be tortured without trial. It meant you could appeal a legal judgment all the way to the emperor himself, something the Apostle Paul famously said when he said, "Civis Romanus sum." I am a Roman citizen. To demand his case be heard in Rome rather than Jerusalem. Roman citizenship was worth something. It was worth a great deal. And Rome distributed it with careful, calculated generosity. The military pass. The most direct path to citizenship for a non-Roman was the army. This is where the system becomes almost impossibly clever. Rome allowed, and actively recruited, non-Romans into its auxiliary forces. Syrians served as archers. North Africans as cavalry, Germanic tribes as infantry, Batavians from what is now the Netherlands as elite shock troops. These men were not Roman citizens when they joined. But after 25 years of service, upon honorable discharge, they received citizenship. Full Roman citizenship. For themselves and their children. Think about what Rome had accomplished with this single policy. It attacked the young men of conquered and the territories, the most physically capable, potentially most dangerous men in those societies, and given them 25 years of the world's most intense military training, discipline, and loyalty formation. And then at the end, it had transformed them and their children into Romans. The men who made cavalry rebellions became the soldiers who suppressed them. The sons of conquered peoples became the army that conquered others. Rome was not used offering citizenship. Rome was manufacturing Romans. The elite pass. The military pass was for common people. But Rome had a separate, equally sophisticated system for elites. Local aristocrats, the nobility, landowners, and leading families of conquered territories were systematically offered integration into the Roman elite structure. Their sons were invited to Rome for education. They were given positions in Roman provincial administration. The most distinguished were admitted to the Roman Senate itself. By the 2nd century AD, the Roman Senate was full of men whose families came from Spain, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The Emperor Trajan was from Spain. His successor Adrian was also Spanish. Septimius Severus, who became emperor in 193 AD, was from North Africa. His family language was Punic, the language of Carthage, Rome's old enemy. Carthage's descendants ruled Rome. Think about what that means for control. The elite families of conquered territories were not used pacified. They were integrated. Their ambitions were now Rome's ambitions. Their wealth was now invested in Rome's stability. Their children's future depended on Rome's continuation. You cannot rebel against a system when your family is part of the system. The Caracalla movement. In 212 AD, the Emperor Caracalla made a decision that crystallized everything Rome had been doing for 3 centuries. He issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, a single edict that granted Roman citizenship to virtually every free person in the Roman Empire. All of them. At 11. Some historians have argued this was primarily a financial move. Citizens paid a different tax rate. But the deeper effect was transformative. In a single legal moment, the distinction between Roman and non-Roman essentially ceased to exist for free people. A farmer in Egypt, a merchant in Syria, a craftsman in Britain. All of them were now Romans. And with that identity came investment in Rome's survival. Because Rome's collapse would now mean the collapse of their legal system, their property rights, their contracts, their children's status. Rome had turned 3 centuries of controlled citizenship expansion into a moment of mass assimilation. It was, arguably, the most powerful administrative move in the history of the ancient world. System 3 is the one that modern economists recognize most clearly. Because Rome, almost accidentally, invented something that the modern world calls economic interdependency. And interdependency, as every trade theorist knows, is one of the most powerful peacekeeping forces in human history. People do not go to war with their best customers. The Roman trade network. By the height of the empire, Rome had created what was effectively the largest free trade zone the ancient world had ever seen. Within Roman territory, gods moved with a freedom that would not be seen again in Europe until the 20th century. Egyptian grain fed the city of Rome, 1 million people, and much of the Western Empire. Spanish olive oil reached Britain. Syrian glass appeared in German markets. British violins were worn in North Africa. Roman wine was drank from the Rhine to the Euphrates. The Roman merchant was protected everywhere he went by Roman law. His contracts were enforceable. His property was secure. Piracy on the Mediterranean, which had been a catastrophic problem before Rome, was systematically eliminated. The sea became what Romans called Mare Nostrum, or sea, an internal Roman law for commerce, creating dependency. Now here is the mechanism of control hidden inside the trade network. When a region became economically integrated into Rome's trade system, it became dependent on that system. A Spanish olive oil producer who had built his entire business around supplying Rome could not simply decide to stop being part of the empire. His wealth, his land, his merchants, his contracts, all depended on the Roman legal and commercial infrastructure. A regional rebellion meant cutting yourself off from the richest market in the known world. It meant losing the legal protection of Roman law for your business. It meant your trade routes became uncertain and your currency potentially worthless. Rome had made prosperity and Roman identity the same thing. This was not an accident. Roman administrators actively encouraged economic integration. They built the infrastructure, roads, harbors, warehouses, that made long-distance trade possible. They standardized weights and measures across the empire. They created a currency system that functioned from Scotland to Mesopotamia. Every time a local merchant grew wealthy through Roman trade, he became a stakeholder in Rome's stability. His children grew up in houses built on Roman commerce. His grandchildren could not imagine a world without it. The grain system. The grain supply for the city of Rome deserves special attention, because it shows how economic dependency could function as political control at the very highest level. Rome depended almost entirely on Egypt for its grain. Egypt, the Nile Delta, the most productive agricultural region in the ancient world, produced so much grain that it fed not just its own population but effectively exported Rome's food security. This made Egypt enormously strategically important. So important that Augustus, after defeating Antony and Cleopatra, made Egypt his personal province, not a regular senatorial province, but a territory he controlled directly, personally, through a prefect who answered only to him. No Roman senator was allowed to visit Egypt without imperial permission. Augustus had learned from Caesar's mistake. Control the grain, and you control Rome. Rome's urban population, 1 million people who did not grow their own food, could be fed or starved by whoever controlled Egypt. Economic dependency and political power lacked into the same geography. The tax system as infrastructure. Rome's taxation system is usually taught as an example of imperial exploitation. And it was. But it was also something else. Roman taxes were collected in Roman currency, which meant that to pay taxes, provincial populations needed Roman coins. which meant they needed to participate in the Roman economy, selling goods or labor in exchange for Roman coins, which they called and used to pay their taxes. This requirement for Roman coins was one of the most powerful engines of economic integration in Roman history. It forced provincials into the Roman monetary system regardless of whether they wanted to be part of it. Once you needed Roman coins to survive, to pay your taxes, to trade in markets that ran on Roman currency, you were part of Rome's economic system, and you had an interest in that system's stability. Rome had made its economy unescapable, and made its economy something you wanted to stay inside. System 4 is the one that operates the most slowly and leaves the deepest marks. It is cultural assimilation, and Rome was its greatest practitioner. Romanization, the deliberate creation of romance. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote something that every student of empire should read carefully. It was describing the Roman governor Agricola's strategy in Britain in the años 70 and años 80 AD. Agricola, Tacitus wrote, encouraged the Britons to build temples, public squares, and fine houses. He educated the sons of chiefs in the Latin language. He encouraged the wearing of the toga. And gradually, Tacitus noticed, the Britons began adopting Roman customs, the colonnades, the baths, the elegant dinner parties. And Tacitus adds a line that is one of the most devastating observations in all of ancient literature. All this in their ignorance, they called civilization, when it was in fact a component of their enslavement. Tacitus was a Roman senator, writing approvingly of Roman power, and even recognized what was happening. Rome was not just conquering peoples. Rome was convincing them to want to be Roman. The architecture of identity. The physical evidence of Roman cultural assimilation is still visible 2,000 years later, which tells you something about how deeply it worked. In what is now Tunisia, ancient North Africa, you can visit the ruins of Elhem. It is a Roman amphitheater, the third largest in the world, built in the middle of North Africa, 250 kilometers from the nearest coast, in what was then a fairly small city called Isdrus. Why did a provincial city in North Africa build a Roman amphitheater? Not because Romans required it, not because legions were stationed there, but because the local elites wanted to demonstrate their Roman identity. They wanted to show that they were civilized, meaning Roman. They built the Colosseum themselves, with local money, to signal their place in the Roman world. That is Rome's cultural system at work. Not force, desire. You can find the same pattern everywhere. Roman baths in Britain. Roman temples in Syria built in a style that merges local Semitic traditions with classical Roman architecture. Latin inscriptions on stones in Germany, Spain, Egypt, Jordan. The people who put those inscriptions in stone were often not Romans by birth. They were locals who had adopted Roman identity as their own, and wanted the world to know it. The language weapon. Language is the deepest carrier of cultural identity, and Rome understood this. Latin spread across the Western Empire not primarily because Rome required it, although Roman administration certainly used Latin. Latin spread because Latin was the language of opportunity. It was the language of courts, of contracts, of commerce, of advancement. If you wanted to do business with Roman merchants, you spoke Latin. If you wanted a position in provincial administration, you wrote Latin. If you wanted your petition to reach the governor, you submitted it in Latin. Within 2 generations, the children of Latin speakers born in Roman provinces often did not even know their parents' original language. Latin was not imposed by force. It was adopted by ambition. The modern French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and Italian languages are not the descendants of Roman colonists. They are the descendants of local Gauls, Iberians, Dacians, and Italics who chose Latin and made it their own. Rome's language outlived Rome's army by more than 1,000 years. The army was temporary. The culture was permanent. The religion strategy. Rome's approach to religion was as clever as everything else in its system. Rome was, in most circumstances, remarkably tolerant of local religions. The Roman religious framework was polytheistic and syncretistic, meaning it assumed that all gods were real, that different peoples could get the same gods by different names, and that adding a new god to the pantheon was not a threat to the existing ones. So when Rome encountered Egyptian Isis, they imported her to Rome. When they found the Syrians and God, they incorporated him. When they met the Persian god Mithras, Roman soldiers adapted his worship enthusiastically. And Rome asked a simple favor in return. Add the Roman gods to your worship. You can keep yours. Used include ours. Burn a little incense to Jupiter or the Emperor's genius, the divine spirit of Roman imperial power. For most peoples in the ancient world, this was easy. The Jews and later the Christians were the exceptions. Their monotheism made the syncretic bargain impossible. Which is precisely why Rome had such persistent and violent conflict with both groups. Not because Rome was uniquely intolerant, but because those communities refused the ideal that everyone else accepted. For everyone else, the religious integration was another thread in the web of Roman identity. Your gods were Roman gods now, which meant you were, in some sense. System 5 is the most visible, the most physical, and the one that modern people most underestimate. The roads. Rome built approximately 80,000 kilometers of paved roads across its empire. Some estimates go higher. They were engineered to last, and they did. Many are still in use today, in the form of modern roads that follow Roman alignments. The standard understanding of Roman roads is military. They allowed legions to move quickly to travel spots. And this is true. A Roman army could march 70 kilometers a day on a good road. The same journey through rough country without roads might take 3 times as long. But the roads were not primarily a military tool. They were a control infrastructure, information and speed. Rome operated what was effectively the ancient world's postal and intelligence service on its road network. Called the cursus publicus, the public course. It was a system of relay stations positioned every 8 to 15 kilometers along major roads, where official riders could exchange horses and continue at speed. A message could travel from Britain to Rome, approximately 2,000 kilometers, in roughly 2 weeks using the cursus publicus. For the ancient world, this was almost inconceivably fast. What this meant in practice? A governor in a distant province who faced a crisis could communicate with Rome and receive instructions faster than any potential rebel could organize a position. The information advantage of the center over the periphery was enormous. Rome always knew what was happening before the people causing it to happen could coordinate a response. Commerce and community. But the roads did something even more powerful for Roman cultural control. They connected people. An isolated tribe in the mountains of Spain was one thing. Hard to control, hard to integrate, able to maintain its separate identity simply through geography. But once a Roman road ran through your valley, connecting you to markets, to neighboring cities, to the wider Roman world, oscillation became impossible. Roman merchants came through. Roman soldiers passed. Roman administrators traveled. Roman ideas, Roman fashions, Roman gods, Roman coins, all of them moved along the roads. And the people living along those roads were changed by the contact, whether they chose to be or not. The road was not used a way to march an army to your town. It was a way to bring the empire to your door. The urban network. The roads connected a network of cities, and the cities were perhaps Rome's most powerful long-term tool of control. Roman policy systematically promoted urbanization across the empire. Cities were built according to Roman plans, the forum at the center, the temples, the baths, the amphitheater, the grid of streets. This physical template was replicated across 5 million square kilometers. Why does this matter for control? Urban populations are easier to tax, easier to watch, easier to supply with food, meaning easier to starve as a coercive measure, easier to address with public pronouncements and imperial decrees. And urban populations develop economic interests that tie them to the stability of the urban network, which is Rome's network. Rome deliberately moved populations from dispersed rural settlements into cities, not always by force, often by incentive. Cities had markets, entertainments, public buildings, water systems. They offered advantages that isolated rural life did not. And don't say you lived in a Roman city. You lived inside the Rome system. You breathed Roman air, literally and figuratively. Nothing lasts forever, and the 5-system Roman control architecture, as brilliant as it was, eventually failed. Understanding why it failed tells us something important about its design, and about the limits of systemic control. The Client Kingdom Problem. The Client Kingdom System worked when Rome had something concrete to offer. Protection, trade access, diplomatic prestige. As Rome's internal stability declined in the 3rd and 4th centuries, as emperors were murdered in rapid succession, as the currency was devastated, as the frontier legions grew weaker, the offer became less valuable. Client kings began calculating whether Rome could actually protect them, whether Roman citizenship still meant what it said to, whether the Roman economy was still the one to be integrated with. The answer increasingly arrived that was, maybe not. The citizenship paradox. Caracalla's mass citizenship grant in 212 AD, which we discussed as a moment of integration genius, also carried a hidden cost. When citizenship is universal, it loses its value as an incentive. If everyone is a citizen, the past of citizenship no longer motivates anyone. The carrot disappears. Rome adopted the promise of citizenship to motivate military service, elite integration, and cultural adoption for 3 centuries. After 212, the promise was fulfilled, and the mechanism of motivation it had stand was gone. The economy unraveling. The economic system began falling in the 3rd century with currency debasement. Roman emperors, facing military and fiscal crises, began reducing the silver content of Roman coins to mint more of them. The result was inflation, prices rising as the currency lost value. The trade networks that tied the empire together depended on a stable currency. When the currency became unreliable, trade contracted. When trade contracted, the economic interdependency that had made the rebellion costly started to dissolve. Regions that had been economically tied to Rome began looking for local solutions to local problems. The economic web fraud, and as it fraud, the psychological integration it had stand fraud with it. The cultural reversal. Here is the most ironic failure of all. Rome's cultural integration system worked so well that it eventually integrated people who then changed what Rome was. The Germanic generals who rose to command Roman armies in the 4th and 5th centuries were Romans, culturally, legally, linguistically. They spoke Latin. They worshipped Roman gods, and later Roman Christianity. They bore Roman military ranks and titles. But they also maintained ties to their Germanic tribal networks. And when the Western Empire began to collapse, these Romanized Germans became the leaders of the successor kingdoms, not as enemies of Rome, but as heirs of Rome, inheriting Roman institutions, Roman law, Roman Christianity, and Roman culture. The Visigoths who sacked Rome in 410 AD did so under a general named Alaric who had served as an officer in the Roman army. He did not want to destroy Rome. He wanted payment and a Roman title. He was, in every meaningful cultural sense, a Roman. Rome's system had integrated its destroyers. The assimilation had worked too completely.